You're quite used to the idea now of taking a major scale and going down to the relative minor, so going to the 6th degree of the scale and playing that as the root note. But what if we chose other notes of the scale and treated those as our root notes? What would happen then? Well, this is what modes are. Let's zoom out a bit and take a major scale that goes past the octave. So we've got the first octave of the major scale and then continuing on up the major scale. Let's keep that there, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a duplication of that same major scale underneath in yellow. You see that with the 1, or the first note of the scale, we're lined up, and the 2 and the 3, etc, etc. Keep an eye on both of these, because as we create modes, these won't align anymore. The first mode of the major scale, i.e. the major scale, is called Ionian. Try and bear that in mind, that whenever I say Ionian, that means the major scale. But what happens if we move everything up and start on the 2nd degree of the major scale and treat that as our root note? Now we have the 1 of this new scale aligning with the 2 in the original major scale. The structure of semitones and tones is still the same as the major scale, but we're starting at a different point. This is called a mode, and this particular one is called Dorian. Let's keep going and look at the other ones. If we move it up again, we get the Phrygian Mode, which starts on the 3rd degree of the major scale, the Lydian Mode, which starts on the 4th degree of the major scale, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and it's worth remembering that Aeolian is exactly the same as the minor scale because it's the 6th degree of the scale, the major scale. If we go back to this image again here, we've got C here, and if we go down to 7 and then down to 6, we get to A, which is our relative minor, otherwise known as Aeolian. The last one then is Locrian, and that begins on the 7th degree of the scale. And we'll play these at the piano in a second so that you can get a bit more of a practical sense of it. The other thing to remember as you play around with these modes is that modes act as keys as well as scales, so that you can play chords on them and do pretty much anything that you did with major or minor scales previously. So for example, if we took the Lydian scale and we played a chord on degree 1, we could also play one on degree 2, 3, etc, etc, and these will all work. They'll sound different to the major scale, but they'll work in the same function. So let's look at those modes now at the piano. Let's treat our Ionian as F. So we have our F major scale as the Ionian. And let's go to our 2nd degree of the scale, which will give us our Dorian. So we start on G, treat that as our root note. So that's G Dorian. We've come across that before, but never quite so clearly as we're explaining it now. Let's do that when our Ionian is now G major, or G, I should say, really. So this is G Ionian. Let's go to the 2nd degree of that scale and treat it as the root note. One of the things that you should experiment with these modes is actually treating the whole composition as based as in a mode, or the gravity is in a mode. So here we could say this is chord 1, this is chord 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 1 again. So we're kind of going. So that chord progression there, 1, 4, 1, 4, is the same as Mad World, a piece that we've looked at so far. But in a normal minor scale, you wouldn't have chord 1 and chord 4 being those chords. Chord 1 and chord 4 would always be minor, if this makes sense. So the whole really powerful thing about mode is that it creates this different structure and different center of gravity that is very different to the other Ionian or the Aeolian. So we've done Dorian, let's move on to Phrygian, which is built on the 3rd degree of the scale. Back in F major, we go to the 3rd degree, and then Phrygian. Let's have a listen to that. That scale, the Phrygian, has a really interesting quality, and each one of them has their own character. But this one is created from this root note to the 2nd here, which is a semitone. And having that so close to our center of gravity gives us a lot of tension. A bit like when we did the harmonic minor scale, that semitone right at the end of it gives it a lot of tension. This time's now right at the beginning of it. sound there. Moving on, we're on to the 4th degree of the scale, or otherwise known as the Lydian, and this is one of my favourite ones. What I love about this one is that it's got a major sound, but our 4th degree, 1, 2, 3, is an augmented 4th. It's a very, very floaty sound. It's often used by film composers in some kind of like otherworldly, dreamlike state. It's used by Thomas Newman in American Beauty quite a lot. Really, really beautiful one. Moving on swiftly, let's go to the Mixolydian. This is often used as a blues scale because we've got this very much sits well with the dominant 7th chord. So let's start F major. Let's go through this properly rather than me playing around. We start on the 5th degree, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we go through the same scale. And what we have is our 7th note, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, is a minor 7th now. So we have a major quality at the bottom and a minor 7th quality at the top, which gives us a dominant sort of feeling. That's our Mixolydian scale. Next, we get to our Aeolian scale, which we know already. We've been doing that for a long time now. This is basically right back at the beginning of this course when I said go down 2 notes in the scale. We didn't name this as a mode, but that's exactly what we're doing. We're playing a mode of the F major Ionian here. Essentially, it's the 6th degree of the scale, but I explained it first in the beginning by going down 2 notes. That's D Aeolian, or otherwise known as your natural minor. That's what we've been doing. And finally, we get to the 7th degree of the scale, which is the Locrian. And it has a very tense, diminished sound. So those are all the modes there for you to play around with. And have some fun with that in your compositions. Treat these modes as actually new centers of gravity where you treat the root of that mode as chord 1. And think about how that impacts your chords within a key, diatonically speaking. And I'll see you in the next video.